We turn our attention to South Africa, a nation grappling with an unprecedented power crisis. In a bold move to combat this energy shortage, the government has granted access to Turkish energy company Karpowership, securing their presence at 3 key ports of the country under special directives. If approved, Karpowership aims to generate electricity on these innovative vessels and distribute it across South Africa's electricity grid. But this ambitious endeavor hasn't come without its fair share of controversy. As Eskom warns of an impending surge in power cuts during the harsh winter months, could this be the solution that prevents the frostbites, or one that is too costly for an already pinned economy? Welcome to Village Square Africa. On the square today, we'll explore the multifaceted aspects of this story, digging deep into the environmental, economic, and political implications. I am Keminni, Amanor. And joining us today are Kevin John Mileham. He's Democratic Alliance and the Shadow Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Gauteng, South Africa. We also have Chris Malikani, who is Professor of Economics at the University of Wits in Johannesburg, South Africa. Gentlemen, you're welcome to the square. Thank you so much for your time.
Lovely to be with you.
Indeed. I'll start off with you, Kevin. When the president says that they will deal with the power situation in your country, did you imagine he'll be taking the country back to the 2021 agreement that, or rather 2021 discussions that had begun with Karpowership?
For quite a while, and it's something that the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Gwede, is particularly enamored with. We believe that there is a certain amount of rent-seeking on the part of the ANC in this contract deal. We also believe that there are problems with regards to a 20-year contract, that a 20-year contract is certainly not emergency procurement. So we would say that if this was a short-term, 2 to maybe 5 years maximum contract, and it was designed to allow Eskom the time and space it needs to repair its existing fleet of power stations, and at the same time to enable South Africa to build new generation capacity, to upgrade its infrastructure, and to procure electricity from independent power producers, then it's something we could consider. But a 20-year contract at more than 200 billion rand that is only effectively going to reduce load shedding by 1 stage is not the solution to our power crisis.
Let me pick the thoughts of Chris at this point. Chris, could this be the solution that South Africa needs at this time? Chris, you're muted. We cannot hear you. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I was saying that I agree with my colleague. This is not going to be a solution to the country's power problems, because the solutions are fairly clear, and the problems in South Africa really are not technical, and neither are they of engineering nature, so to speak, skills shortages and so forth. The problems are to do with interests that have got their hands on Eskom, and those interests are politically linked, as my colleague has said.
I see. I want us to look at some of the issues that have been raised by people who do not agree with the long-term agreement, one of which is 200 billion rand that could be spent on this. Now, Kevin, if you compare that to what the country needs to be able to put Eskom back on its feet, what analysis do you make from that?
So let's start with the fact that the country needs to upgrade its transmission infrastructure. That is priority number 1. We've got to allow new generation capacity to connect to the electricity grid. And that has been estimated to cost in the region of about 180 billion rand over the next 7 to 10 years. Eskom doesn't have that money right now, so they would need to find that. So 200 billion rand would go a long way towards that. It would also go a long way towards building new generation capacity at a decentralized level. So we're talking about at municipal level, where municipalities could then procure their own generation capacity and ease the demand on the Eskom fleet. So that would be a secondary area that it could focus on. And then thirdly, we've got to look at the maintenance that is so desperately needed in Eskom's power plants. The coal fleet is running at about a 50% energy availability factor, and it needs to be maintained. It needs preventative maintenance, and then we also need to repair a lot of the issues that have arisen over the last several years because we've been running that fleet so hard. So all of that money could be utilized far better if it was invested in South Africa rather than paid to an offshore company who are effectively going to provide power for a limited period and then sail away into the sunset.
Kevin, I'm going to come back to you and we'll talk about what we know about this agreement with Karpowership, because like you mentioned, the 200 billion rands is not readily available. If it was, perhaps we'll be putting it into Eskom's generation capacity. And so we'll look at, the details of the Karpowership agreement as we know at the moment in a bit. But let me move on to Chris now. Chris, I know you wanted to take a bite out of that question. Feel free to do that. But again, while you're doing that, I want you to also tackle what you think the key question should be for Parliament as far as this agreement is concerned.
Well, the starting point for Parliament to check is who stands to benefit from this agreement. That's point number one. Point number two, Parliament has to do a cost-benefit analysis, like we've been discussing. Is it economically making sense for us to spend so much money on Karpowership than on building and getting the power generation, existing power stations up to speed? Those are the cost-benefit analysis questions that Parliament has to ask and get answers for, and check the political economy of this whole thing. Who stands to benefit from this agreement?
Is there anybody who would stand? Let me rephrase so that I don't lead you on this question. What could those, when you say to do the checks and balances on who stands to benefit, what does it mean?
It means that, for me, the whole Eskom saga, as I said before, is manufactured. It's not coming about because somehow there are breakages and plants are too old, South Africa cannot generate electricity. No, we can generate electricity. There was a point where load shedding was overcome in 2017, and there's statistics to prove that, and contrary to what my colleague said, the plants will not run hard. Actually, there is capacity to generate electricity, but the crisis of energy in South Africa is deliberately manufactured in order for private interests to make money out of the country's desperate situation.
I see. Kevin, let's come back to the conversation on what you know now about this agreement. It's the largest opposition party, in South Africa. What have you learned about the details of this agreement with the Turkish Powership?
First of all, the agreement is not yet final. What's been signed at the moment, or what has been issued at the moment, is what is called a Section 79 directive by the Minister of Transport, which authorizes Karpowerships to moor in South Africa's harbors. So that's the first part. But there are still environmental authorizations outstanding, and then there's still a power purchase agreement that needs to be signed between Eskom and Karpowerships. But I want to come back to the point that Chris made about the maintenance and the overcoming of load shedding in 2017. In 2017, we basically ran those power plants incredibly hard, and we were running them at maximum capacity. And as a result, there was no maintenance being done at the time. And so we ended up in a situation where those power plants are now breaking down. And so we've got, if you go to Kusile, four of the 6 units at Kusile are inoperable at the moment because they have broken down. One of the units at Medupi is broken down. And it's not that there are vested interests who are trying to privatize Eskom. Those plants are broken. So the energy availability factor, the 50% of our installed capacity that is not operating, it's not operating because those plants are not working. They can't work. They need to be fixed before they can work. And to do that, we've got to give them a bit of time and space. We've got to allow we've got to build new generation capacity and allow that to come online in order to give Eskom the opportunity to turn off generation units and fix them and do preventative maintenance and do what needs to be done to bring their fleet back up to an operational capacity or a reasonable operational capacity.
I see. So Chris, you have talked about cost-benefit analysis on this one. I want us to do a bit of that just before we go into the core of the core cause of the crisis that Eskom has been facing over the years. Let's look at the Karpowership. We understand that it could be putting about 3 gigawatts of power into the national grid for South Africa. From where you sit, if this goes through, how could it be changing or solving the generation needs of the country?
Like my colleague said, the impact of Karpowership on solving the energy problem is going to be minimal because it's just going to reduce the stage by 1. We are going to just, instead of having stage 6, Karpowership can only assist us to go to stage 5, for example, which is not significant and is not a long-term solution. But the key thing here, their interest, like I said, their interest. My colleague is clearly pursuing the interest of IPPs in electricity. That is why he also supports the view that Eskom should not maintain its power stations because he's pursuing the IPP agenda. But
hold on, Chris. Hold on, Chris. Chris, let's deal with that. You say that Kevin's position on Eskom's plans is because he wants to protect the interest of IPPs.
Yes,
okay.
Because what's happening here is that...
Go ahead.
What is happening here is that those that want Karpowership also do not want Eskom plants. Those that want IPPs also do not want Eskom plants. And the Eskom plants are breaking down, in my view, not because structurally they are breaking down. The former CEO of Eskom has mentioned that they sabotage, their interest, long-term contracts that companies have to maintain power stations. In order for them to continue having business, they deliberately engage in sabotage.
Very well. So before I have Kevin respond to that, my question to you is, what will be the problem with engaging with IPPs as you say Kevin is advocating?
The problem is that as we speak now, IPP contracts, more than 50% of those IPP contracts are going to one company, you see. And secondly, the IPPs, it is well known, are not going to assist us to industrialize as a country, to add more value to our minerals, to increase job creation. So we need the base load. The story of base load and industrialization is sometimes escapes the people who are calling for these IPPs. And then lastly, most of the inputs that are used to produce this IPP equipment is not South African, it's imported, specifically from countries in Europe, the US, and even China. So even at that level of mild industrialization, as I can put it, the country is not going to benefit in the long term.
I see. I want to hear Kevin's reaction to some of the things that you, Chris, have said here.
So I think the starting point has to be that I want electricity. I don't care where it comes from. I don't care who produces it. I want electricity because the only way our economy is going to grow is if we have electricity. That's the single biggest factor that is hindering our economy in South Africa. We have the highest unemployment levels in the world. And if you ask any investor, if you ask any business what the cause of that is, what the cause of our lack of economic growth is, they say it's an unreliable supply of electricity. So I want electricity. I don't care if it comes from Eskom, if it comes from IPPs. That's the first point I want to make. The second is that if we are getting foreign investment to build power plants, if we're getting IPPs to build power plants, great, that's fantastic because it's going to help our economy. And so I don't understand why we would be trying to block people who are willing to invest in the economy of South Africa. It is critical that we have that investment.
No, Chris, hold on for me. You'd have your time. Kevin, finish your point. I've got a question for you.
It is critical that we have investment in South Africa. It is critical that we create opportunities and jobs and have an economy that is growing. At the moment, we are so far behind the world average that we are becoming rapidly a failed state. And we can only primarily address that, by building our electricity infrastructure, whether that is through state-owned entities like Eskom or through independent power producers.
Very well. So my question to you now is, what would be the difference between an engagement with Karpowership and that of and an engagement with the IPPs?
Sure. So Karpowerships would be effectively an IPP, an independent power producer. There's no difference between them and any other independent power producer. That's the first thing. But the issue that we have here is that what was initially billed as emergency procurement is now being labeled as a 20-year contract. So that's an issue for me. Secondly, the costs of this project are outrageous. They are a huge albatross around the neck of the South African fiscus and the South African citizen. And we are going to be paying that for years and years to come. We also have no guarantees with regard to the input costs of Karpowerships. So we're looking at 220 billion rand over 20 years, but it may be significantly higher if the gas prices go higher.
I see. Chris, you butted in. I'd like to hear what you had in mind to say.
I did not hear that.
I'm saying that you butted in while Kevin was speaking. I'd like to hear your thoughts now.
Yeah, my thoughts are, number one, the country is very rich in coal. And secondly, the country has been deindustrializing and in the process losing jobs. IPPs, particularly renewable IPPs, are not suited to drive industrialization. All countries that have industrialized are using coal power or nuclear or hydro. South Africa does not have enough hydro. We have coal as our driver. So if we are really serious about the country's development, we will build our coal-fired power stations, and the ones that work, we'll prioritize them to make sure that we provide cheap, affordable electricity to our industrialists and entrepreneurs. And then on that basis, begin to move steadily to other forms of energy on the basis of our strengths. So what is being proposed about IPPs and so forth is coming home to bite those who propose IPPs, because Karpowership is IPP.
Indeed.
And IPPs, as I said, they've been monopolized by one company. More than 50% of the PPA contracts from IPPs, one company, which is politically connected, has got them in South Africa.
I see. Gentlemen, I want us to talk about the generation mix just before we wrap up on our conversation today. And Kevin, I see you shaking your head. I'd like to believe that you have a reaction to what Chris has said. You'd have your time. I want to give you time to do that, but you need to move along quickly with that. The Energy Minister, Gwede Mantashe, has talked about the fact that South Africans are allergic to nuclear energy, and he went on to say that environmentalists are those making it difficult for the country to look into other forms of electricity generation. Your quick thoughts on that while you react to Chris as well.
So firstly, I think that we need a diverse energy mix. I think that we can't be reliant on one technology. We need to look at what is the best suited mix for South Africa. And that might well be renewables plus gas plus nuclear plus coal plus hydro, whatever it might be. But we need to look at a diverse energy mix. The second aspect of it is that we have some of the best renewable resources in the world in terms of solar and in terms of wind. Our energy efficiency of those resources is significantly higher than, for example, Europe, where you don't have the amount of sunshine that we have in South Africa or the wind that we have in South Africa. So we need to utilize those resources as well. The third thing that I would highlight is that the investment in coal is starting to decline at a rapid rate. Banks and financial institutions are no longer willing to put money into coal-powered generation. So we need to look at how we're going to finance that. And then the last point that I'd want to make is that when it comes to something like nuclear, you're looking at a long-term solution. It's not something that's going to be a quick fix. Nuclear is 15 years down the line minimum. And it's a massive, massive investment. It has to be guaranteed by the state. Private investors are not going to come in and build a nuclear power plant on risk, whereas they may well be willing to build a gas plant or a solar plant or a wind farm or whatever it might be. So that would be a very difficult sell for me at this point to build a nuclear power station.
I see. Gentlemen, I'm afraid we've run out of time. We'll have to leave our conversation here, but we'll pick this up again, after the committee discusses this agreement with Karpowership. I hope to see you again. Thank you so much. Kevin John Mileham.
Thank you very much.
Indeed. Kevin John Mileham is Democratic Alliance and Shadow Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy in Gauteng, South Africa. Chris Malikani, Professor of Economics at Wits University in Johannesburg, South Africa. You're still here on The Square. When we come back, we'll stay in Gauteng and talk about the cholera outbreak there. Don't go away.